This BOF Live is brought to you in partnership with Zalando Designer, a destination for luxury fashion inspiration, where consumers can discover and shop both established and emerging brands that share their values. Learn more at corporate.zalando.com.
So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alice Gividen. I'm content strategist here at the Business of Fashion. And after a summer break, I'm delighted to welcome you all back to BOF Live. As many brands and retailers begin to now action their post-pandemic plans, winning over the Gen Z customer is emerging as this critical growth lever. And there are certainly some compelling data points that support the idea that new generations will be the primary engine of growth for the luxury market in the coming years. Bain & Company estimates that millennials and Gen Z will contribute 130% of market growth between now and 2025, which will more than offset any declines in sales among older generations. And interestingly, mapping Gen Z spending specifically is key, as this cohort is set to account for 40% of the global personal luxury goods market by 2035. And as this cohort continues to join the workforce and gain more financial agency, more autonomy, they will only gain in their share of luxury customer spend. So today, to posit the retail channels, the product strategies, the service standards that successfully engage this increasingly valuable consumer cohort, I'm delighted to be joined by two experts in this space who have actually recently collaborated themselves to reflect these market shifts. So Anaheta Berenberg is the buying director at Zalando Designer, the luxury arm of European e-commerce player Zalando, which operates in 23 countries with over 40 million consumers. Anna, it is a pleasure to have you here.
Hi, Alice. Hi, Stefan.
And joining her is Stefan Siegel, the founder of Not Just a Label. This was a global platform that really was a pioneer in connecting consumers with emerging luxury players, and it now represents designers from over 150 countries. Stefan, thank you for joining us, particularly for doing so on the road, on your travels. So we're really, really delighted to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And what's interesting really is that both Not Just a Label and Zalando are really experienced in connecting customers to the brands that they want to buy, focusing on emerging luxury market talent and a younger consumer, respectively. And both are really now making plays in where these two focuses overlap. But before we get started, just a small bit of housekeeping. We know our audience is a global one, so we'd love for you to share where you're joining us from in the chat function below. And if you need any help whatsoever, our customer support team is available via the chat as BOF events. So I think just to signpost some of the things we're going to discuss over the next 40 minutes or so, I think firstly, we'll consider Gen Z's relationship with luxury itself. We'll then go on to consider category consumption, sort of how that relationship is translating into spend. And finally, we'll consider the retail strategies that are successfully engaging this cohort. So really to begin with this idea of consumer attitudes, Gen Z's relationship with luxury, for instance, 9 out of 10 Gen Z consumers believe brands should detail their beliefs on environmental and social issues. It's something we reported on in our State of Fashion report with McKinsey. And this is something that is perhaps indicative of a shift towards more value-driven spending. So Anna, I'd love to start with you. This consumer group's behavior is clearly evolving and is linked to values. And this is a trend that forecasters and commentators believe will be a significant driver in purchasing decisions, particularly with this cohort, even if it's not yet impacting shopping behavior globally at a more macro level. So kind of with the access to your 50 million customers, how have you noticed Gen Z's relationship with luxury evolving at perhaps this more macro level?
Yeah, so like you said, we have 45 million active consumers, and a very significant number of them are in that Gen Z demographic. And we spend a lot of time actually researching it and analyzing it to answer a lot of the questions that you have. But what we know is that fashion is like a key way for them to express themselves. And they're going into the workforce and they've already started to buy luxury. We can see that. That's not like a hypothesis. We can really see it in our numbers. And it's not that they are, shopping exclusively luxury brands today. Actually mixing and matching and buying different types of brands at different price points continues to be like a major part of their consumer behavior. But there's all these variables that are intertwined in their consumer behavior, and sustainability and also interacting with brands that they believe are addressing environmental and ethical or social issues continues to be super key for them. So giving them transparency, and I'm speaking like very generally, I'm not even speaking on Zalando specifically right now. Like these are the things that matter to them. These are how they're going to, they make decisions. And we need to enable them to make, decisions based on their values, based on the things that matter to them, while also like celebrating the fun of fashion, celebrating why luxury is luxury, celebrating that creative process. So we definitely see like a very significant cultural shift. And we think that we're positioned quite well at Zalando, and specifically Zalando Designer, to address it.
I'm interested, Anna, actually, because Zalando clearly sees luxury as this growth lever, and you have traditionally serviced this younger consumer in what you stock and how you communicate itself to your customers. But only recently have you really doubled down on a much more formal luxury offering with Zalando Designer. What inspired this shift? What potential do you see in this market?
So we definitely want to become the leaders in this cultural shift, actually, specifically for the reasons that you said. And what we've seen is they're already buying into luxury. We see that their frequency of returning back to site is more, that they're increasing the number of luxury items in their basket and of quite significant price points. We see that they care about sustainability, and Zalando is a place that you can shop sustainability quite transparently. And so we actually think that like we're positioned in a really good place to service this demographic. And what we've done to double down on it is actually kind of hot off the press. On Monday, we launched our first Zalando Designer marketing campaign. And, we're all like, maybe Stefan not, because he's in the wilderness right now, but we're all glued to our phones. And Gen Z is no different, and they're very much a social first customer demographic. And our campaign that launched on Monday is a social first campaign. So it's an inclusive, immersive campaign that is completely shoppable on TikTok, and it's something different. And this is like our first real example of what we're doing at Zalando Designer to the world. And it was done with like a group of collaborators that have been brilliant. IB Kamara styled it, Coco Capitan shot it, Vincent Haycock directed it, Lachlan Watson is the protagonist. And so that's kind of like a really exciting thing that happened this week. We've also launched, I think, like around 50 brands this year so far that have been advanced contemporary and luxury brands. So like from Alberto Ferretti to 032C to Victoria Beckham to Monster Gabrielle, and really like building what it means to double down on luxury, because of course, our brands are our major partners and we're doing everything with them. And then, and on the 30th of March, actually, we launched Zalando Designer on our site. So like really a dedicated area of our site that is, it's really cool. Like whoever's listening, like go look at it, because it's fun, it's cool, it's dynamic, it like feels young, like it feels young millennial, Gen Z, like the way it's styled, the way it feels. And finally, and this is like really coincidence that this panel is happening on this specific day, because not just the label and Zalando announced the partnership that you referenced. We announced it on Monday. So really bringing like emerging brands to our customers, creating like a really diverse portfolio of brands is like just another step in this doubling down process.
That's interesting. Thank you. And we'll certainly touch on that concept of collaboration a little bit later on. But I'd like to just kind of pull the conversation back a little bit to thinking about these consumer value shifts. Stefan, when we were preparing for this call, you mentioned that this was a cohort that wanted to save the world. You were one of the first, as we've mentioned, one of the first platforms to really connect young customers with young, emerging, independent talent, often lesser known brands. You were really giving them a voice, but they sat at more contemporary luxury or even pure luxury price points. I'm interested. These aren't massive names. They haven't got the benefit of a Gucci or a Prada logo slapped onto it to justify a super high price point or suddenly like a hype generated luxury purchase. So what in your experience is motivating Gen Z to shop these brands, these designers at these price points?
Well, I think it's really interesting times for us and emerging designers. I mean, we, over the last sort of 10 to 12 years that Not Just a Label has been around, we've seen the product of emerging designers has always been the same. They create locally, they create things in small batches, made to order items, and that has not changed. But what has changed is that the young designer, let's say the luxury item that has been made for you by a designer that nobody else knows, was something quite trendy 10 years ago. It was seen as sort of like the sideshow to the bigger brands. It was not really something that a buyer like Anaheta would buy. And it was just something that was just always sort of, a little sort of side attraction to fashion weeks, to fashion, to, sort of trade shows and various of industry events. And I think if we sort of jump forward to what has been happening in the last couple of weeks, I mean, our sales in August have gone up by 362%. And that all comes from Gen Z. It's just people buy with a conviction now. And I think the same applies to sustainability in fashion. It is no longer something that you sort of, you say, okay, I'm just going to buy this item because I think sustainability is the future. I think it is here now. And people are doing this out of conviction. They're saying, I want something that I love. I want something that has been made for me. I want to know where my money goes. And with all these parameters, emerging designers are central to what the Gen Z customer wants.
That's super interesting. Thank you so much. It's interesting, this idea of having real intent behind their purchases, behind what Gen Z are looking to buy. And so kind of with that in mind, I'd like to move on to starting to think about Gen Z category consumption with that purchasing agenda front of mind. I want to think about how that translates specifically into spend. Post-pandemic, I mean, Stefan, you just referenced it. We've seen an appetite, increased appetite for high ticket investment items that feel timeless and feel special and having more of a connection to product. But I'm interested in double clicking into kind of how Gen Z spending is spanning markets and price points. I think they certainly are more mindful when it comes to spending. They're informed by ethics, by the need, by the use case, by social and cultural movements. There's loads of ingredients. And I think retailers really need to understand this to surface the right product to this customer at the right time. So I think, Anna, if we can come back to you, multi-brand platforms have quite a unique take when it comes to consumer spend data, because you have the ability to track spend across brands and price points. So I know we're going to talk about your collaboration with Not Just a Label later on, which I'm sure responds to elements of the market trends that we're seeing that's relevant to this cohort. But let's start with a kind of deep dive into the market trends you are seeing emerging with this Gen Z customer. How are they shopping?
So first of all, what is it's really interesting, Stefan, about your sales, because it's also the fastest growing group on site. So it's a mixture of consumers that are Gen Z consumers that have bought on Zalando, not Zalando Designer, but bought on Zalando and now buying on Zalando Designer, and a group of people coming from outside of the site. So just the sheer number of consumers is increasing quite dramatically and quite quickly, like I think faster than any of us really anticipated. And also, as Stefan said, he's also seeing the same thing. And their engagement is also different. Like on Zalando, they're not only engaging in like pure luxury, like they care about pre-owned. Like that's an area of the site where they can buy secondhand product, and they are shopping beauty, and they're shopping like the cool hot drop sneakers, and just like this buying behavior of really shopping across price points, across brands, across propositions, like that, like deep relationship. It's just so much more apparent in this generation, which is really exciting because they're really like themselves and their own buying behavior kind of knocking down barriers. And that's cool. Like that's exciting, I think. The part that is, that we always need to address is this part about like ethics and sustainability specifically, because we know that Gen Z wants to behave more sustainably. We know that they want to make more sustainable choices. We know that they want to make value-based decisions when purchasing fashion. Like I think the three of us have talked a lot about it, but when it actually comes to that decision point, have we enabled them to do it? And we reference it as a attitude behavior gap, but like, do they feel empowered? Do they feel knowledgeable enough to make decisions based on their values? And I think this is a really important point. So whether it's shopping, the more sustainable flag on Zalando, clicking into it, and then just like understanding why it's more sustainable, what certificates it has, or shopping by value. So like animal welfare as an example, or water conservation. These are values that you can shop on Zalando. They are creating like a curated section of the site based on their own values. And that's really exciting in and of itself. So I think the market shift is happening very quickly simply because of the number of consumers that are increasing and then the behavior once they're on site.
That's so interesting. Thank you, because we'll come to curation in just a moment. But with Stefan, I just like your input and your experience from a platform perspective. Sorry, Gen Z, as Anna has just said, are really shopping across markets and price point. But I'm interested in how they shop cross category, and I'd be interested to know what specific product trends that you're seeing with this cohort globally. What lessons can we learn about the kind of products that they buy?
Yeah, and just to connect to what Anaheta said, we're dealing with the most informed customer. They're running around with smartphones that, we were joking about this before, how we did not grow up with that power, but the entire human knowledge is at their fingertips. So they have that. But Anaheta was correct in saying the fashion industry, however, has not given them the tools to actually make wise choices. And that is our fault, because we don't allow for this generation to actually decide with their wallet. And I think this will need to happen now, where designers saying, I want to buy something sustainable. I want to buy something that is, for me, has been personalized for me. And not everyone else on Instagram or in this world has it. And that is exactly what we're seeing across our store. And I think what is also different is that, I grew up, and I'm sure you guys grew up with social paradigms of how you should be dressed if you go to this occasion, what you should wear when you go to university, and so on. And I think what we're seeing now is this liberty of pretty much doing what you want, but driven by different sort of cultural aspects. We're dealing with the most ethnically diverse generation ever, and I think we will see that in fashion as well. And I wish I could tell you we're selling handbags or we're selling this and that, but I think the most astonishing trend that we've seen is we carefully introduced designers who cannot ship an item within 48 hours, and we said, designers, you need to promise us that you dispatch this item within 21 days. And designers started making things made by order, or they're calling it cut to order. So they have the fabric ready, but they only start cutting it once the order comes in. And 60-70% of our orders over August were made to order, which I think is astonishing. And I think that just shows that they're ready to wait. They want something that nobody else has. They're ready to wait almost a month for that piece. And we're seeing this cross category. And because we're connecting the designers directly with the consumer, we're also seeing really interesting requests. Like yesterday, we had a customer who bought 8 pieces and said, they were all women's pieces, but he said, can you actually make these pieces for me in men's size extra large? Wow. So, these are opportunities that we can provide. And this is exactly what also Anaheta was saying, that we're connecting sort of, the conviction with the choice that they can make, at least in luxury fashion.
That's really interesting. Thank you. And actually kind of now pulls me back to really thinking about how Gen Z attitudes and values translate into spend. Everything we've just been discussing indicates that this consumer is shopping more mindfully, is prepared to wait for the right product, craves things that feel more custom. So Anna, you touched on this earlier, but I'd love to take a slightly deeper dive in what role you believe curation plays in surfacing different products that really speak to this customer, and particularly at the right times as well, when they're ready to purchase.
So we talked about, like, I wish everyone that's listening in could hear about what we talked about before this call, but we talked about that, we all want everything we want when we, in front of us in the way we want it. And it's, I guess it's, if you think about the department store, like historically the department store is a multi-branded location that everyone feels like included in, right? The young consumer with the first babysitting money, the super VIP customer, like that, the department store has been able to create this inclusive space that has all different brands, emerging brands, established brands, different price points, etc. And if you think about like curation, the department store makes the creation for you, right? Like that's a given. And you think about Zalando and Zalando Designer specifically, you can think about it as like the greatest European department store. And the major difference is that curation for us is just defined differently. So it's defined by personalization. It's defined by inspiration. It's defined by engagement. So if you think about personalization, your ground floor, Alice or Stefan, is going to be different than my ground floor. Because we've interacted with the platform in different ways. We've bought different things, we've looked at different things, etc. And so that personalization, that's exciting. That's an exciting curation, especially for a young consumer. In terms of inspiration, like here's like an example of how we do it. So we have something called brand homes, and brand homes are a window to the world for the designers. The designers can, or the brand can create a place where their stories are live, where clips from their runway shows are live, etc. And if I, as a consumer, follow a brand, there's a followership button for every brand, then I see those stories more often, and I get inspired by that brand specifically more often. And then on engagement, like the example I used with just like creating your own curation based on your own values, this is important. Like you have a engagement of, you're engaging with our platform because of the values that you believe in. And so I think if you put it all together, you kind of come up with this new way of curation specifically. It's based on the customer and how the customer wants the curation to look like. So I think putting the power in the customer's hands is something really exciting.
Totally. And I think staying on this theme of curation, I mean, I recall certain retailers curating sort of shoppable edits based on outfits for when lockdowns were lifting in Europe. It was becoming that specific. In your experience, what kind of curation is most compelling for this customer? I know you've just talked about really putting curation in the hands of the customer and in the hands of the designer and really connecting the two. But, is it one that's based on ethics? Is it based on product use cases? What are your learnings from kind of curation and things that you've experienced?
I think you can't like silo it like that, like on ethics or on, I don't know, product specifically or something like that. I think curation is this thing of having the familiar because you like the familiar, the things that you like, and then having the things that you don't know, like this discovery process, like that's exciting. Like what Stefan does, and not just a label, like that discovery process for consumers, like that's exciting, like that's cool. And at Zalando, you get recommendations and you get different discovery options, etc. And it's that paring back of the known with the discovery. And I think that's exciting. And if the known for you is like wanting to know that you're making more value-based decisions and more sustainable decisions, then that will happen for you because that's your no. And in the meantime, you might get recommendations of like really cool brands to follow or a really cool product that might be inspiring for you, or outfits that are specifically inspiring for you. Like, how do I pare back this top that I've bought historically on Zalando with something new? Like, these are exciting ways of curation.
Totally. I really like that idea of platform kind of taking on that role of a discovery tool, I think, in a sense, for so many customers. And that really leads me on to what I'd love to ask you, Stefan. At its core, Not Just a Label really looks at this idea of platform as brand curator. I think, for instance, you have drop downs on your site that groups ethical and sustainable products by different designers. So I'd love to know some of your learnings here. In your experience, how should platforms be viewing curation when it comes to Gen Z? What are your learnings and what are the key metrics for success?
Yes, I mean, I wish I had the answer because Gen Z is a bit of a black box for so many people. But what I really want to drive home is curation means being an opinion leader, and it cannot be a boardroom strategy. You cannot just sort of from one day to another decide I'm going to become a curator or I'm going to curate my assortment. It really needs to come out of personal conviction, and that is something that, I think we can't fake things to Gen Z anymore. And I think this is really important for fashion, that this cannot be a strategy, but it needs to be a mindset across the entire company. And yeah, platform, not just a label in itself. We are a container, we are an umbrella, but we are a curator for sure. But we are in no way telling people what to buy. We're in no way telling people, this is what the trend will be. And we've never done that. And I think that is sort of part of our success, that we sort of invite people to come onto our platform. And the amount of criticisms I received, and especially in the early days, even from magazines who said, no, Stefan, you should have a list of the top 20 designers, or you should have a ranking of the top 50. And we were always against that. There's 49,000 users on Not Just a Label now. Of those, yes, we have different categories of black sheep, gray sheep, as we call them. But they're in the thousands, and the rest is up to you to find out what you like, where, do you want to spend your money in Lebanon, or do you want to spend it in Brazil or in the UK? And the stories are all there for you to discover. And I think that is so important, that, again, nothing comes out of boardroom strategy where we say we need more, Black owned businesses right now, or we need, more ethical or ethnical clothing on our front page. We're not driven by that. We're more, in some way, we're a very humble art gallery that in some way invites people in to discover fashion, and it is fashion that people have never seen, unfortunately. People are used to big brands, and I think with Gen Z we see this sort of interest in something completely new. And by all means, as I explained before, it is not like shopping on Amazon. You might receive your items in 3 or 4 weeks, and it will be different. It will be a different process, and I'm still, surprised and incredibly happy that we partnered with Zalando, because they could have signed a partnership with any other brand that would have been much easier and less stressful. But working with 50 emerging designers, and this is a partnership that will continue for the next foreseeable few seasons. We'll increase that to hundreds of brands, and working with these tiny brands is difficult and is hard, but it is exactly what the consumer wants.
That's great. Thank you so much. I completely agree. There really are no shortcuts, I think, when it comes to really reaching this customer and actually really taking a share of that spend. I'd like to really now move on to consider the retail strategies specifically that are most engaging to this customer. What's clear, and it's something that we were talking on before everyone joined this call, is that this is a customer that is shopping everywhere all of the time. They seek personal touch points with brands, but they also expect access to global brands via a host of digital channels, via m-commerce, social commerce, things I'm sure that will come up over the next 15 minutes or so. So I'd like to really explore the nuanced approach that's really needed to speak to this Gen Z shopper. And I think, Anna, if we come back to you, when we were preparing for this call, you were telling me how Zalando operates across Europe, but it also prioritizes localized strategies that are quite country specific. What does that look like operationally? How are you viewing localization as a kind of growth strategy?
Yeah, so we're a European business. We don't operate outside of business. And what we know, for lack of a better term, is that it's not the United States of Europe, right? Like every culture is like so massively different. Like there's so much nuance when you compare, Italy to Sweden to Germany to wherever, and that can't be ignored. Like there is just not a one size fits all. And that's like a really hard thing to address, because we stand for something, and especially specifically on a value, like based on the values that we've all talked about. But the strategies need to come locally. And what that means is that we actually have local markets teams really addressing like what resonates locally and what the communication needs to look at, and what the customer engagement strategy needs to look at, and what do local partners need to be, etc. And like the easiest example is that I was recently at Copenhagen Fashion Week, and I was walking through the street, and I really noticed that the vast majority of the young consumer was dressed head to toe in Danish or Scandi brands. There's this like sense of community and this sense of like supporting the local businesses and supporting the local, creative world. And that's cool. Like, that's really great. Like, that's wonderful, especially in this world that's like so hyper globalized. And what we need to ensure is that those consumers get to have the brands that they love, their local brands are offered to them on Zalando Designer. And then simultaneously, we need to give the brands a platform to push their own strategy. So that might be to grow in Southern Europe or Eastern Europe or whatever it may be, and allow for that kind of local approach, but global opportunity or European opportunity to be like really instilled in our strategy.
That's interesting. Thank you. And actually really leads me nicely on to my next question. I think clearly for luxury brands, for smaller designers, being able to kind of plug into that global strategy, this idea of global access, but with localized marketing and localized communications is advantageous. But what other operational benefits exist for luxury brands in plugging into a multi-brand platform?
I want to say Stefan want to take it since we're going to start partnering. But so we have a large customer base, and there's a lot of them, like really a significant number of them are Gen Z. So when you partner with us, like you get access to these customers, i.e. you get their attention. There's a platform where they're already on to really like to address them. And I would say the partnerships that we have are the most important thing to us. Like, we need to care for those partnerships, and sitting down with the partner, with the brand, and deciding like, what's our joint strategy? Like, how is your brand, whether it's like the most established brand you can imagine, or really like a small emerging brand, like what is the definition of success for us? And how are we going to enable that to happen? Because not every brand wants to grow, 150% year on year. Like, some brands want to really focus in on the customer engagement. Other brands want the awareness to grow specifically. So it's really different per brand, and it's up to us to find like a strategy that works for that brand, and also like a business model that works for that brand. So if a wholesale business model is the best option, then we go that route. If a marketplace business model is the best option, then we go that route. We call it partner program, and really just like enabling the brands to use our platform, our technology, our insights to really like move forward together is like how we approach it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Stefan, I'd love to come back to you. We've spent a lot of time over the last 35 minutes or so discussing the themes of curation and personalization, even if elements of that is just surfacing up, emerging talent organically. If these themes really are key to this younger customer, how should this strategy be carried across the whole retail experience? I mean, you said earlier how you had to start, really from the ground up, thinking of it as your initial business goal and not tacking it on later down the line. But I'd love to know how you kind of consider how it should be spanned across that entire retail value chain.
Yeah, I mean, I think the important thing is that, at least for us, and I'm speaking for us and emerging designers, but I think there's something that applies to any bigger brand out there as well, is that fashion cannot go back to where it was pre-pandemic. I think that is just something, I keep on hearing this every day, is when are we going back to having our fashion weeks and our events and, and the same old. And I think, for me, the biggest strategy is we need to stop the destruction of our planet. There's nothing else that is more important than that, and that needs to drive your brand, be it in fashion or in anywhere else. And I think if we put that first, I think a lot of things become clearer. A lot of things show us also how inefficient we are, especially in fashion, how brands work. And I think the answer lies somewhere in making our business more sustainable, but also giving Gen Z what they want. And I think the solution there is on-demand manufacturing, being able to provide them with something different, being able to provide personalization as well. And as Anaheta said before, there's so many brands that, they don't want to become multi-million-dollar brands, but if the industry can allow access to these brands, then I think we have a solution there. And that is exactly what Zalando is doing with us as well. Because, we are very, very, very niche. We are sort of at the end of the long tail model of fashion, but now we're going to sell our designers on one of the biggest fashion platforms in the world. And I think that will show, the customer that there's a choice, and a choice that they can make with their wallet. So I think that is really important. And as we said in the beginning, Gen Z is driven by conviction. We can't fake it. We can't fake, we can't greenwash. We can't just, jump on certain trends. And unfortunately, there's still 50-60% of the fashion industry that hasn't learned. We haven't learned from Me Too. We haven't learned from, cultural appropriation. And there's a lot of people who do not want to learn from COVID. And I think, you can't change, you can't stop change from happening. And I think that is really what's going on right now. And either you're jumping onto the train like we are and partnering with Zalando, or you're going to be left behind. And I think, my advice to brands is really, work with your factories, try to get away from this sort of oil tanker that you're sitting on that cannot steer left or right, when an iceberg is coming closer. And I think that is really sort of, fashion really needs to change, and I think the solutions are there.
Yes.
Alice, do you mind if I comment to Stefan?
No, please do. Of course.
I think we generally have an opportunity. So what we need and what we want is for the industry to come together, because we know, we've talked now 35 minutes or 40 minutes we know the consumer wants it, and we're trying everything in our power to create transparency to make more informed decisions when shopping online. But we have I think Zalando has a real responsibility, because we have so many brands on site. I think we have over 4,000 brands now, to really help bring the industry forward and partner with our brands. And that's I guess that's just a really important point, that we have to do it together. It will not happen if only one of us does it. And we have to come together and collaborate on this topic and really move forward in this journey of of sustainability, ethic, taking care of our environment, considering ethics and social topics, etc. So I think Stefan's definitely said it more beautifully than me, but it does require all of us to get together and do it together.
This actually really leads me on nicely to kind of really the last point I wanted to address. And it's something that has kind of propped up across the conversation. But there have been, recent global forces within luxury have inspired shifts in the market and actually new commercial realities. Since 2020, we've seen, a deal inked with Prada and Net-a-Porter that signals a new era for wholesale. Dover Street Market and Nordstrom have collaborated to utilize retail networks and share brand and customer access. I think in the last 2 weeks alone, Nordstrom again has teamed up strategically with ASOS. The two of you are also collaborating. We've been talking about a shift towards co-opetition, so collaborating more regularly with one-time competitors to really drive business performance ultimately, and to take a share of the Gen Z spend. This is something, it's quite meaty, and it's a good point to end on. So I'd love to hear from both of you. Perhaps we can start with Stefan or Anna, whoever would like to kick it off.
Go ahead.
Why in your opinion, are people collaborating to solve problems? What role do you think this kind of collaboration will play specifically in luxury over the medium term?
Yeah, collaborations are nothing new. We had this, I think, when was it, 5 or 6 years ago? I think London Fashion Week was a sort of celebration of collaborations of chewing gum brands partnering up with fashion brands. And I think back then it was probably done more out of marketing purposes. I think now it's more out of I wouldn't say solving problems, but I think there's an interest in teaming up and solving problems together. And I think that is also somewhere an underlying factor of working with Zalando. And we had conversations on our products that we sell from the same designers will also be sold on Zalando, and I'll be very curious, where people go to place these orders. But I think it's just different target groups, different platforms, different audiences, and by working together, if the conviction is the same, and from everything that Anaheta said, it just confirms that Zalando understands the very important principles that we set up for ourselves. Then there's nothing stands in the way of working together. And again, for example, out of joke, last year we said we're wondering what our fashion designers are wearing in their studios. And for a long time, we were playing with the idea of creating a not just a label collection. And so with our designers, we created a collection now that will go on sale in October, which will be a collection designed by our designers, but actually made for them. So we will have hoodies with pockets for scissors and stuff like that. But again, Zalando said, this is a really interesting collection that will be appealing to their consumer as well. So we will sell it both to our designers, and then Zalando will sell it to the consumer. And, I think nobody is going there with an Excel sheet saying, actually, this might be detrimental to our bottom line. But I think, right now it's about doing the right thing.
It's interesting, I think, to consider now for the first time, people really are willing to kind of share resources, share access to different communities, again, for a greater share of spend and to foster authentic collaborations. And if I could perhaps end with you, we've obviously focused a lot on specific collaborations. I'd love to end on a slightly more macro level on why you think collaboration is really key moving forward, to speak to Gen Z, to take luxury into this new space, basically, that feels collaborative, that feels exciting, and that speaks to this younger customer for the whole host of reasons we've discussed over the live.
Yeah, I actually don't mind using the phrase like solving problems. I actually think that's a good phrase to use because we're more likely to solve problems together. Sustainability problems or also consumer like challenges. So whether it's like through partnership, we recently made a partnership with Sephora or with Not Just a Label, like these like coming together and creating, greater value. It's like exponential value, and I think the consumer is going to feel it. And also like, I think we're going to feel it. Like, I think working with Stefan and Not Just a Label, like we're also like, we feel good about it. Like it's the right thing to do. Like it's going to be exciting for these designers. It's a decision that's based on values, based on cultural, like two companies with the similar cultures coming together. And so I actually think like, solving problems and addressing like what matters is actually the macro level of all of this.
Amazing. Thank you so much, both. I think those themes of collaboration and co-opetition are certainly positive ones to end on. I'd like to thank you both, Anna and Stefan, for bringing so much to this conversation. I've certainly learned a lot from you both, so I have no doubt that our community has found it really insightful. Thank you so much to the BOF events team, and also thank you to everyone for attending. I see the chat is super busy, so it's amazing that you're all connecting and sharing your learnings. Just to confirm that if you miss any part of today's session, it will be available to watch on YouTube after we close. Thank you so much again. We look forward to welcoming you back to BOF Live next week. And thank you so much, and bye for now.
Thank you, Stefan.
Thank
Don't
you.
get eaten by a bear.
Bye.
Bye.
That's right.